Lecture 12, A Multi-Centric World. Mikhail Gorbachev's resignation and subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 signaled the end of the bipolar world divided between the two superpowers of the United States of America and the Soviet Union. For a while, the U.S. acted as the sole superpower in the world, but as the influence of the U.S. began to slowly wane, multiple competing centers of world power became stronger. These include, but are not limited to, the European Union, the Eurasian Economic Union, India, the Asian Tiger countries, China, and Brazil. The first two mentioned are roughly based on the Cold War divisions in Western Europe and Eurasia. The tension between East and West is much more subtle now than it was during the Cold War and may not be as much of a concern to world stability in comparison to other regions, in particular the Middle East and parts of Africa. These regions have and are producing terrorists who have committed horrendous acts throughout the world. One intergovernmental organization that has tried to maintain world peace in the midst of sporadic terrorist activity is the United Nations. The UN was founded in 1945 to ensure another world war will not occur. Since the UN lacks an effective military force of its own to enforce its decisions, at times it has proven to be ineffective in resolving world conflicts. Perhaps such a lack is for the best, since if the UN had an effective military force comparable to or better than any other military force, it might become controlled by people intent on ruling the entire world in a dictatorial manner. Some hope that world harmony will be attained as Western countries promote global prosperity promised by capitalism. This promotion has been called globalization. Such people claim that although capitalism involves negative effects of competition, in which the losers suffer consequences, when taken as a whole, capitalism has consistently raised the standard of living for all. Others contend that this would be true if international trade was done in a fair, free manner and did not occur at the expense of the environment or involve sweatshops known for their unjust practices to workers. Those who protest globalization point out that Western countries have consistently protected their own banks, farms, and industries with subsidies and tariffs in order to maintain their status as superpowers. One very evident example is the so-called Washington Consensus that promotes globalization according to principles established by U.S.-influenced organizations, the U.S. Treasury, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. This raises the question as to whether the Western-dominated approach to politics and economics is the only valid option. If it is not, what are the other options? With the hope to more objectively understand the phenomena of Western-dominated globalization, we will take a look at a number of the various centers of powers located both in the West and the East. These new centers of power are promoting what Narcisse Serra and Joseph E. Stiglitz describe as a post-Washington consensus. European Union. One economic reason why the European Union was founded was for Western European countries to collectively compete with the superpower status of the United States. It was founded in 1992 by the Treaty of Maastricht, shortly after the Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991. As is evident in your transcript, according to the treaty, the goals of the European Union are to establish a common European citizenship, a common currency, a common social policy, a common economic policy, a common foreign policy, and a common security policy. As the European Union continues to incorporate more member states, it has faced a number of critical questions. Is the granting of a European Union membership to countries that are not considered economically advanced, such as the Ukraine, in the best interest of the European Union as a whole? Will these countries destabilize the European Union? Similarly, will the granting of European Union membership to countries that have significant religious differences from the vast majority of European countries put the entire Union at risk of disintegrating? One example is Turkey, which in 1987 applied for accession to the predecessor of the European Union called the European Economic Union. In 1999, the European Union officially recognized Turkey as a candidate for full membership. In 2004, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger argued in France's magazine Le Figaro that bringing Turkey into the European Union jeopardizes European culture since, and I quote, Europe is a cultural and not a geographical continent. Turkey, asserted Ratzinger, and I quote, always represented another continent throughout history, in permanent contrast with Europe, so to equate the two continents would be a mistake. In order for European Union to stay intact, Ratzinger believes, it must acknowledge and maintain its Christian roots. Eurasian Economic Union. A few of the Eurasian countries have taken Russia's lead to form a competing union called the Eurasian Economic Union. Similar to the goals of the European Union, Eurasian Economic Union was formed on May 29, 2014, to integrate the economic markets of various Eurasian countries. As of 2015, the member states only include Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Armenia. Like Turkey, and unlike the other three countries of the other Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan is predominantly an Islamic country. Whether this will be a destabilizing factor in the Eurasian Economic Union remains to be determined. India. In the 1980s into the 1990s, India's economy rapidly grew after it shifted from being a command-based economy, determined by state policy, to a market-based economy. A market-based economy is essentially determined by privately owned companies competing for customers. The market reforms were solidified in 1991 when India's finance minister and economist, Dr. Manmohan Singh, began systematically to implement economic reforms. The economic reforms that were undertaken by India that led to its economic growth included tax reforms, deregulation, allowing foreign investors greater access, and privatization of state-owned industries. In 2013, India was ranked the fourth largest economy of the world, according to GDP, behind the United States, the European Union, and China. It is also one of the fastest growing economies in the world. While India's industrial output, foreign investment, and export sectors all have indicated growth after the reforms were made, these advances occurred at the same time when India's poverty and unemployment were increasing. Asian tigers. Asia's high economically performing nations and one region, which were first designated as the Asian tigers, are Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. Others include Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Similar to India, after the Asian tigers underwent a phase of industrialization during the 1960s through the 1990s, while reforming their economies in accordance with the market-based approach in place of a command economy, they experienced a steady and high growth rate. As detailed by Thomas M. Leonard, the common characteristics of the Asian tigers were to, and I quote, focus on exports to rich industrialized nations, sustained rate of double-digit growth for decades, non-democratic and relatively authoritarian political systems during the early years, high tariffs on imports, undervalued national currencies, trade surplus, and a high savings rate. End of quote. A common inherent weakness in their approach, again pointed out by Leonard, was their over-reliance on demand for what the Asian tiger countries could export. An interesting feature in the Asian tigers' success story is their combination of economic freedom with a political authoritarian system. This demonstrates that at least elements of capitalism's free market approach can be combined with dictatorial systems. It is not intrinsically necessary for the economic model of capitalism to be integrated with the political system of democracy. It also effectively works in authoritarian regimes. China. As mentioned previously, the major economic, political, and military power of China blends together a capitalistic market-based approach to its economy with an authoritarian socialist, also called communist political system. Under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, beginning in 1998, China moved away from a state-owned directed economy that Mao Zedong had established. Deng Xiaoping did this by dissolving collective farms, permitting families to own land, privatizing certain state-owned industries, encouraging the formation of privately owned companies, and by inviting foreign investors into China. Also under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, the Communist Party's constitution was reworded. According to the revision, China is a socialist market economy. To view Deng Xiaoping's impact on the economic vitality of China measured by GDP visually, see the chart provided in the transcript. China exhibits its totalitarian socialist side by not allowing its currency, the yuan, to be determined by supply of and demand for the yuan. Instead, the government sets their currency at an artificially lower rate in relationship to other currencies, above all with the US currency. This allows China to sell goods at a very low price in the US and in other countries, while at the same time ensuring that imported goods into China sell at a higher price than they would be if the Chinese yuan was not artificially devalued. The devaluing of the currency is an example of an authoritarian economic practice that reflects China's political authoritarian communism. Another notable example of China's communist state limiting freedom, in this case political freedom, occurred on June 4, 1989, when the government violently opposed a pro-democracy movement that was gathered together at Tiananmen Square. It is not clear how many protesters were killed by governmental forces at Tiananmen Square. According to the Chinese government, 241 protesters were killed. According to the Soviet Union, 10,000 protesters were killed, and according to the Chinese Red Cross, 2,600 protesters were killed. Brazil. We will now turn our attention to a former colony of Portugal that is now the most powerful country in Latin America, Brazil. This democratic country is the fifth largest country in the world and has sustained consistent economic growth. In 2013, the economic ranking determined by GDP was as follows: United States, European Union, China, India, Japan, Germany, Russia, and coming in at 8th place, Brazil. Other economic data indicate that Brazil is the world's third largest exporter of food, has been recently ranked in 2010 as the sixth in world manufacturing power, and may, due to recent discoveries, become a major exporter of oil. Even though Brazil is rich in oil, half of its cars do not run on gasoline, but rather on fuel derived from sugarcane called ethanol. A main reason for Brazil's economic success is traceable to the late 1980s, when the government began transforming the country's economy on a competitive market-based model. Taxes on imports and exports were greatly reduced, and the government, while retaining some companies, sold off others worth $110 billion. For this reason, Brazil was called the privatization's poster child. Africa. The book Asian Tigers, African Lions asks the question, why are there Asian tigers but no African lions? In other words, why sub-Saharan countries since independence have not become richer while countries in Southeast Asia have? With the purpose of answering this question, in 2006 a research project was funded and founded by the Netherlands Minister for Development Cooperation. One explanation that was offered by this research project was that the Southeast Asian countries which have experienced rapid economic improvement were, from the perspective of the whole, economically stable. In addition, farmers and people desiring to begin small businesses were granted economic freedom, and the Asian government aided the poor and those living in rural areas. These three simultaneously occurring factors precipitated in the Asian countries' economic turning points during which their countries entered into a phase of transition from continuous poverty to sustained growth. According to the above theory, unless African countries fulfill the three mentioned preconditions, they will remain in a continuous state of poverty. And in your transcript, I provide a map that illustrates Africa's low economic development in comparison with the rest of the world. I invite you to look at that map and compare Africa with India, China, and the Asian tiger countries. Conclusion. We have come to the end of our survey of Western civilization. Throughout this overview, the relationship of the many to the one has been a consistently recurring theme. Can the many people of many nations live harmoniously as one global family? Will the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, which strive to respect diversity and unity, last? If so, what are the ideal conditions that will assure its survival? And what are conditions that will likely lead to its collapse and possibly possibly another major war? Will one nation or empire work towards eliminating other weaker nations, such as France under Napoleon, Germany under Hitler, the USSR under Stalin, in order to achieve an oppressive totalitarian unity? As we end this course, may we think about what we have learned about Western civilization from the relationship of the one to the many. What can we do to ensure that legitimate diversity present in Western civilization as it interacts with the diversity present in non-Western civilization will not be a cause for strife and war, but rather a reason for ever deeper unity? God bless.